During our lifetime, there have been momentous changes in Western culture. Why has Western civilization declined? What was once condemned is now celebrated. What was once celebrated is now condemned. Even our very language has changed. Sex is no longer really a noun related to biology. Instead, it's become a verb, an action word, an increasingly loveless action. We find marriage and family life disintegrating, identity groups rising, diversity celebrated. London, the largest city in Britain with a population greater than that of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland combined, now has a minority of its citizens identifying as white British. And Birmingham, the second largest city in Britain, will be that way in 2021. At present, there are 20,000 inhabitants of that city who cannot speak English. Now, why did all this happen? We didn't ask for it, but it happened anyway. Well, it wasn't a conspiracy. There weren't a group of shadowy men in a back room in the Kremlin plotting the downfall of the West. Well, actually, there probably was, but that didn't work out. And it didn't just happen. Things don't just happen. It's down to ideas. And ideas, once thought and articulated and sent out into the world, they spread. They mutate. They reach out and touch people and change things as they go. And these ideas had a source. Now, if we want to look back into history, we could go back as far as the French Revolution. But let's just stick to the 20th century. At the beginning of that century, it was pretty obvious that Marx was wrong, that the proletariat was not going to unite and overthrow capitalism. He'd got it all wrong. Sure, there was one revolution in Russia, but it wasn't a proletarian revolution. It was a peasant revolution enforced by violence. And so some Marxist intellectuals really thought about it, and they began to gather in the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt, which is why they're called the Frankfurt School. And instead of concentrating on the economy, as traditional Marxists did, they concentrated on the culture. But this was Germany in the 20s and 30s, and Hitler was coming to power. And most of these Marxist thinkers were also Jewish. And being a Jewish Marxist in Nazi Germany was not a recipe for a long and happy life, so they fled. Interestingly, they didn't flee to the USSR. They may have been communists, but they weren't stupid. No, instead they fled across the Atlantic to the USA. And gradually they found themselves ensconced in the institutes in the East, the academic institutes like Columbia and Harvard, and they also found themselves in California. There they were, great centres of learning and academia, and the world's largest centre of mass media at the time, an influential place. And they spoke and they thought and their words went out, and they shaped what we have today as political correctness. Now, many argue that the Frankfurt School really didn't have much influence, and that in fact there hasn't really been a cultural revolution. Well, just listen to one of its leading thinkers who will be following in this video, Herbert Marcuse, who said, "One can rightfully speak of a cultural revolution, since a protest is directed toward the whole cultural establishment, including the morality of existing society. What we must undertake is a type of diffuse and dispersed disintegration of the system." And it worked. They shaped what we call political correctness today. We see it in so many areas. The progressive insistence on sex. It's a tool to be used for the changing of society. And that comes from Marcuse in Eros and Civilization. He argued that sexual liberation was the best counter to the ills of society, and he saw many ills in society, including the family and marriage. Instead of that, he wanted what he termed polymorphous perversity, which is pretty much what it sounds like. Anyone doing anything with anyone else at any time and in any place, whatever floats your boat. It worked because sex sells, especially amongst youngsters. His famous dictum, "Make love, not war," proved tremendously successful. Marcuse preached the great refusal, the protest against that which is, which was a rejection of all Western concepts. He lauded sexual liberation and the merits of feminist and black revolution. His primary thesis was that university students, ghetto blacks, the alienated, the asocial, the third world, could take the place of the proletariat in the communist revolution. The old proletariat had failed them, they would invent a new one. And so society is splintered. And it also led to the intolerance that we know today. See, Marcuse taught that freedom of speech was actually intolerant because it allowed the expression of values, ideas, thoughts of which he did not approve. He called that repressive tolerance, and instead he argued for liberating tolerance. Liberating tolerance then would mean intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left. In other words, in progressivism today, you have the freedom to be progressive. And we didn't look to our politicians to alter this very quickly, because politics follows the culture. It doesn't lead it. Politics follows the culture. Now, this is nothing new. It's been thus ever since ancient Greece, where we find Damon of Athens, musician and advisor to Pericles. Show me the lyric of a nation, and it matters not who writes its laws. And so the culture changes and will continue to change. The next video in this series will look at why progressives loathe Christians. In order not to miss it, hit the subscribe button below. Thank you.